Forget frequently asked questions.
Common sense, common knowledge, or Google.
How about advice from a real genius? 95% of people in any profession are good enough to be qualified and licensed. 5%
go above and beyond.
They become very good at what they do, but only
0.1%
are real geniuses. Richard Jacobs has made it his life's mission to find them for you. He hunts down and interviews geniuses in every field: sleep science, cancer, stem cells, ketogenic diets, and more. Here come the geniuses. This is the Finding Genius Podcast
with Richard Jacobs.
Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with the Finding Genius Podcast. I have Gordon Krass. He's the CEO of a company called IntelliGuard. We're going to be talking about clinical inventory management, intelligent solutions, and distribution. We'll get into what that means shortly. But Gordon, thanks for coming. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, tell me, if you would, briefly, what's the premise of IntelliGuard? What do you guys do?
Sure. We're a late-stage startup company. We use RFID technology, software, and data analytics to really improve the supply chain of medications within hospital and ultimately make for a much safer patient orientation. So we're looking at patient safety, we're looking at efficiencies, we're looking for improved outcomes.
What happens with medication distribution right now? Is it that they run out because no one's tracking them, or do they give the wrong medication to a patient? Like, what are the big challenges in the industry?
Well, this is one of the myths that I think, or misperceptions that people have about how hospitals are run. But one of the most remarkable things I've seen as I've gotten engaged and involved with this business is hospitals in the U.S. today are cutting edge on the clinical side of the business. We're using robots to do surgery. We have incredible imaging technologies. We're doing procedures that weren't done 5 years ago. We're doing imaging that wasn't done 5 years ago. So the overall clinical side is highly advanced, yet the infrastructure that runs a hospital is 40 years behind the times. It's old technology. Most of it is still paper. Most of it is still human interactions. Humans make mistakes. And while people think the supply chain of medications is secure, the truth is it's not.
That's bad, yeah. I notice, I go to the doctor and I'm still handed a clipboard with paper. It's weird. Like, why don't they give me an iPad? And, when I've gone to the hospital, I'm asked the same stuff like 10 times by different people. And it looks like it's going into a computer, but I don't know if anyone's looking at it or if they think I'm lying. And when they ask me 5 times, why is this happening?
Well, it's happening because the investment that hospitals are making is clinical. It's not infrastructure. So as an example, in the business we're in the supply chain of medications, and this includes critical medications such as narcotics that are used in the operating room procedural areas in surgery, very important medications. The average inventory accuracy, meaning where are the drugs, how many do I have, is about 60%. I don't know any private industry today that could manage their business with only having a 60% accuracy on their inventory. The fact is, this in today's environment is highly unusual. And what it means is, it means errors. It means medication errors. It means patients are given drugs that have expired. It means patients are even given drugs that have been recalled, and patients have been given the wrong drugs. So it makes for a very complex environment, and it shouldn't be that complex.
Well, it's only people's lives are at stake, so it's no big deal, right? Just kidding. But,
exactly.
Are hospitals held to task if they have a high or a bad outcome for a given condition or for all their conditions? Do the hospitals care? Is there any incentive to make this better?
Number one, I want to be clear. I think hospitals care. I think the people that work at the hospitals care. But you're dealing with a hospital infrastructure that has multiple silos. Pharmacy is a silo, administration is a silo, the clinical is a silo, and materials management is a silo. All of these things are not looking at the greater good. They're not looking at what the large problems are. So as an example, in the space that we're in, drugs and supplies are the highest cost items within a hospital, second behind labor, which is the highest cost. Yet they don't know where particular medications are. They don't know what they have on hand. There's counterfeit drugs getting into the supply chain. There is diversion of narcotics occurring in the clinical areas of the hospital. It's, like I said, most businesses would not be in business if they operated this way. And the hospitals simply have not invested on infrastructure, and particularly with the types of technologies that are available today, such as RFID, such as cloud-based computing, that would allow them to address and fix all these problems.
So, all right, are you focused, I guess you can't focus on everything, so you're focused on the medication side of it, right?
Yes, there's a lot of applications that are available. We chose medications for a couple of reasons. Number one, it has a big impact to the patient. And one of the most important drivers that we have as a company, something I talk to all the employees about, is regardless of what you do in this company, there's a patient at the end of it. So patient safety is a very important driver for us as a company, and that's why we chose medications. The second reason we chose medication and this application is because it's a very hard thing to do with the technologies we're doing. You're talking about all different form factors. You're talking about vials. You're talking about syringes. You're talking about ampules, and they're all over the hospital. They're not just in pharmacy. They're in the operating room, procedural areas, on the floors, in the nursing stations. So managing this is a very complex environment. Our thinking was if we could crack the code on doing that in pharmacy and the operating room, we could pretty much manage any problem going forward.
So, okay, are you starting with the pharmacy and the hospital, or are you looking more downstream to, again, procedures on how to administer the medications or track them once they're out of the pharmacy?
Yeah, good question. And we started with the pharmacy, and we enabled a technology, and I want to talk a little bit about RFID so that the listeners can understand the premise of RFID, because not everybody does. But simply put, an analogy that I think everybody understands is we all go grocery shopping. So when you go grocery shopping, you fill up a cart, you put your items on a conveyor belt, and then you see it has to go one at a time through a conveyor belt and be scanned by a barcode. That is traditionally how things are done in hospitals today. The difference with RFID is, imagine taking a basket, tapping your credit card on an RFID reader on the basket, going through the grocery store, filling it up, and then walking out the door, and it automatically, in seconds, captures the 50, 75 items that you have with incredible accuracy, and it goes on your credit card. That's what we're doing in medication management. Today, they're either doing it manually, hand counting. You'd be amazed how many drugs are being hand counted on a regular basis, or they're using barcodes. But barcodes are not effective. They don't work because they are counter to the workflows that clinicians do. So we started in the hospital pharmacy. That was where we begin the process. And then we have now moved to what is we consider the hardest area to manage, which is the operating room. Because these drugs in the operating room, not only are they plentiful, but they include controlled substances, such as morphine, such as fentanyl, very important drugs to monitor and manage. And effectively today, those systems are not in place.
It'll be really cool if you could also have either a level or a weight sensor, if there was a cheap enough way to do it on all these bottles. So not only you could see where they are in real time, but you could see the levels of them in real time. That would be super cool.
Yeah, and we're not using that, but what we do is we have a system so that the inventory is managed automatically. So as an example, what you're talking about is you're an anesthesiologist, our workflow is as simple as you can get. It's open the drawer, take out what you want, close the drawer, take care of your patient. In the background, we're scanning every vial in there. We know exactly what they pulled out. And at the end of the case, we have a software package that does what's called a waste witness. So it actually captures by individual item what was administered to the patient, what was wasted, and you get a full accounting record from end to end, and then all that data goes to pharmacy. And then on top of that, we have a data analytics engine where we throw all this data into a data analytics engine that provides decision-making capabilities that, quite frankly, today pharmacists aren't making because they didn't have the data available to do it.
Well, the other part of it, too, is that whatever medication is being dispensed, either in ampule or whatever form it's going into someone, So if it also simultaneously recorded and updated that patient's record, like, John Smith got 8 milliliters of X at this time, it will be a totally end-to-end solution to record everything.
Well, that's a great segue into what we do, because we, in addition to doing all of this on our anesthesia system and our pharmacy systems, those systems are connected to the electronic health record, so that every item dispensed, we know the patient, we know a lot about that patient in terms of allergies, and we capture all dispensed items that went to that patient. So we not only create a clinical record, but we can create an accurate billing record. So charge capture becomes a real value proposition for the hospital, because of this system that exists today that's highly manual. They're missing a lot of charge capture.
Okay. Very interesting. Yeah, I can see why this would be a huge help. Have you done any pilot studies? Are there hospitals that are using like the full implementation of what you do, and how much better their outcomes if so?
Yeah, and the answer is yes. So there's several areas. I'll talk about just a few of them. But if you talk about it from a pharmacy standpoint, we're hearing from our directors of pharmacy that they have regulations that they have to meet. They are required, and they get audited along these regulations. They've had real difficult times managing manual processes with an auditor. This automates everything, so there's literally an electronic record that an auditor can see. And we're hearing directors of pharmacies tell us this is the most advanced automated system for managing medications they've ever seen. It's giving them peace of mind, because they know if an auditor walked in that they're going to have all the data available to show them exactly where the track and trace of every item is. That hadn't existed before. From the anesthesiologist standpoint, who administers the medication, is systems that exist today are either manual, they've got to hand write them, or they have to use barcode scanning. So imagine that anesthesiologist being out that checkout person at the grocery store, scanning every individual item. Every time they do that, they're not focusing on the patient. What we've been able to do, and what they're telling us, is we've simplified their workflow so they can now focus on the most important thing, which is the patient. And then we provide a full reconciliation, which makes their life easier. So anytime you make a clinician's life easier, they're going to like what you're offering.
I didn't bring up this, but generic versus branded drugs. I've read a book called Bottle of Lies, and it's about Ranbaxy and some of these other companies that the generics are made of God knows what. So I don't know if hospitals use generics all the time, or that could play in too. Unfortunately, I mean, if something goes wrong in the hospital with your system, they'd probably be much more likely to track it back and say, "Ooh, when we gave this drug X, we had like a 30% jump in bad outcomes, so we got to look into it." Even though the FDA hasn't recalled it, something's wrong.
Yes, and you're bringing up a very interesting and important topic, not just around generics, but also the counterfeits that are coming into the supply chain. So today, it's virtually impossible to go back and do a track and trace of any individual item that was given to any individual patient other than handwritten records. We automate that, so by the fact that we're capturing every single item, all the way down to what's called the NDC number, so the actual ID of that particular medication through the supply chain, we've got a record from end to end. And this plays very well, and the reason why it's important you brought this up is that the Congress has passed a law called the DSCSA, which really is, in simplified terms, a requirement for pharmaceutical companies to track and trace every drug that goes through the supply chain. And today there is an effective technology to do that. RFID provides a really compelling answer to providing an end-to-end track and trace solution. In addition, has some unique properties that can authenticate the actual brand, that the drug that was given that was branded with a particular pharmaceutical company actually came from that pharmaceutical company.
Right. I knew about generics, but I didn't realize about counterfeits. Like, how pervasive is that?
It's a bigger problem than what people acknowledge, but counterfeit drugs, particularly opioids, as well as narcotics are getting into the supply chain, where they're actually leaving the supply chain to from bad actors who are shipping back bottles that are replicas of the original, but unfortunately what's inside those medications is probably water or something that certainly is not representative of what the drug is given. The impact of that is significant because those drugs can end up going to a patient. And there's lots of examples of where patients are given a pain medication, for example, not showing any relief of pain. And the reason is because it was counterfeited or altered in some way. This is also happening because of what they call diversion, which is a nice way of saying theft. But diversion in hospitals of narcotics, and it's leaking through even at the clinical levels at an alarming rate. So it's a significant problem. And it occurs because there's virtually no accountability, track or trace of medications today. So we close that gap. And hospitals, it's another area you asked earlier, but one of the things we hear from hospitals is that they really believe they're addressing the problems associated with diversion and counterfeiting in ways that they didn't know was possible.
What makes me afraid to go to the hospital? Well,
it's really true, and you know, I talk about this with hospital executives whenever I get the opportunity. But you know, we're on the cutting edge of medicine. We're seeing robot-assisted surgery. We're seeing unbelievable imaging capabilities. We're seeing biomeds that are doing things that we didn't think possible 5 years ago. The clinical side is extraordinary, the best in the world, yet the infrastructure side is really behind the times. In fact, it's probably based on 40-year-old technologies or manual processes, and it has not caught up because the investment has been made. So there's a huge opportunity to bring it into the modern world, and that's one of the things we're trying to do with our technologies.
Wow. So are you getting, what kind of responses are you getting? I mean, how many hospitals have you approached, and are a lot of them like, oh, please help us, or are they resisting?
Well, our technologies in managing medications is used today in about 500 hospitals in some way, shape, or form. We've just recently introduced the anesthesia product late last year, and we are in 4 hospitals, adding a 5th hospital by the end of this month, and the response is very positive.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's excellent. So what does a full rollout look like? Like, how ambitious is this? Is this going to be the new standard, hopefully, you know, if you can get it out to enough hospitals?
We are hoping that it will be the new standard. We think it's a very compelling technology that solves a lot of problems. We picked pharmacy as a starting point. As I mentioned, we rolled into the OR because it was the hardest area to manage. But then you start going out, where are medications managed? Medications are managed across the spectrum of healthcare, to include the nursing floors, to include the procedural areas, the outpatient clinics, all the areas that manage medications. You need this capability of being able to track and trace in order to provide an environment that provides safe medication practices for the caregivers and most likely for the patients. And in that vein, one of the reasons that as you can tell, I'm very passionate about this, I'm very excited about this, is one of the things I did before coming this company was I looked at other industries. RFID has been around a long time, and retail is probably the most advanced application, but it's used in airlines, it's used in industrial. But Macy's, for example, will put an RFID on a $20 belt, and they'll know the pedigree of that belt from the point of manufacturing through the distribution chain, when it hit the big box store, what shelf it was on, when somebody bought it, and when it walked out the door. But yet today a hospital can't find a $20,000 medication. And there's something wrong with that. And that's what drives us to address these issues, because that should be the safest environment. That should be the environment where inventory accuracy is 99.99%, not 65%.
Yeah. You know, years ago not too long ago, probably 2 years ago, when I did a call like this, they'd be like talking about blockchain, you know, for everything. Is that necessary? Is there a high level of security needed for all this, or is it really just get the system in place and then go from there? Like, how does security play in?
It's a great question. So I'm going to really start with the data, because that's really what you're talking about. So in order to secure the supply chain, you've got to feed the data system, whether it's blockchain or anything else that you would use, any type of ledger system. You need to make sure that the data going in is accurate. That's the biggest challenge, because if it's bad data going in, it doesn't matter where throughout the supply chain, it's bad data throughout the supply chain. So to secure the supply chain, blockchain is a wonderful answer because of all the security and openness that it does. So it's that good balance between being proprietary yet being open and allowing for security. But you got to make sure that the data going in is important. The second part of that is that most of the hospitals today on their infrastructures, and this is probably part of the handcuffs, so to speak, that they have, are using very antiquated premise-based solutions for their data management. They've got server rooms, they've got data rooms. With the cloud, you have so much capability, well, whether it's Amazon, Azure, to not just secure data in a HIPAA cloud that's already certified, but to scale and expand in ways that weren't possible with these other types of systems. So when you look at scalability, when you look at security in the cloud, and then you add elements like blockchain, now you're starting to get to a full-blown solution for the DSCSA, for the full track and trace end-to-end. But the key element of that is making sure that the item data that's fed to these systems has the level of accuracy that you want.
Okay, yeah, makes sense. I don't know if you're able to say, but again, how much of an improvement, and what are your KPIs for improvement? And can you say what they are, at least the ranges, or if you don't know, what's possible?
Sure. So I can share with you what the KPIs are and some of the important elements that our customers look at. So we look at workflows and work processes and improvements on efficiencies. So that's one area that's KPIs, and we've got clinical studies and case studies that shows a very substantial workflow improvement, which with those improvements, you reduce the propensity of errors. We have an area of charge captures. Charge capture is a very important area. We're seeing our customers tell us over 40% improvement in charge capture. That helps the hospital financially, but it also helps the patient because you know that their bill is accurate going in because of the ability to track at the item level. Some of the other pieces of this is the whole area of optimization of inventory. So how do you manage an inventory that you can't see or that you can't manage without the accuracy and the data analytics that allows to make predictions of saying, look, if you optimize your inventory this way, you can take 20% of your inventory out. That's a big number when you look at a hospital inventory spending $500 million a year on medications. So there's a lot of elements to this that really pays off. And the most important element personally, as well as for us as a company, is making sure that no expired drugs get into the supply chain and get to a patient. Making sure that if a drug is recalled, it's pulled out of the system and doesn't inadvertently get to a patient, or that a counterfeit product doesn't get to a patient. Those are the most important elements, as I talk about, that there's a patient at the end of everything we do.
Yeah, definitely. Well, it's been a really great call. Gordon, I know you're passionate about this. It's clear that we desperately need it. So, again, I hope that your system is adopted and becomes the norm because it's really needed. Again, I don't want to be afraid to go to the hospital or have anyone I love go there and this happened. So I appreciate you coming on the call. What's the best way for people to track the progress of IntelliGuard and find out more?
The best way is our website. It's ig.solutions. So IG standing for IntelliGuard, and they certainly can follow our progress there as well as we're publishing case studies through social media, and we try and keep the public and the customer base very informed of all of the activities that are going on as a company.
Okay, well, great. Well, Gordon, thank you for coming, and thank you for what you do. I appreciate it.
Well, Richard, thank you. I've enjoyed it. I appreciate you having us.
You've been listening to the Finding Genius podcast with Richard Jacobs. If you like what you hear, be sure to review and subscribe to the Finding Genius podcast on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. And want to be smarter than everybody else? Become a premium member at findinggeniuspodcast.com. This podcast is for information only. No advice of any kind is being given. Any action you take or don't take as a result of listening is your sole responsibility. Consult professionals when advice is needed.